when I think of that intersection between the people and the communities and the resilience that is required to still embody that Southern charm that so many people are familiar with when they think of the Lowcountry.
And let me just add, that's Southern Charm is in the ideal, not the TV show, right?
That is right, absolutely.
Welcome back to the Road to Resilience podcast, where we explore the people, ideas, and experiences that help us navigate life's toughest challenges and emerge stronger. I'm Jon Ray, the founder and owner of the Florida Resilience Group consulting firm, and today we're diving into a topic that touches every one of us at some point in our lives: resilient enough to stay. We often celebrate the courage it takes to walk away from difficult situations, but what about the courage it takes to stay? To stay committed to a relationship, a mission, a career, a community, or even to yourself when the easier path would be to quit. Resilience isn't just about bouncing back from adversity. It's about adaptation, which means standing firm through uncertainty, discomfort, and change. It's also about knowing the difference between staying because you're stuck and staying because you're growing. That distinction can define not only our success, but our character and open the opportunity for the other pillar of resilience, which is transformation. Today's conversation explores what it really means to have the resilience to persevere with purpose, how to recognize when staying is the right choice, and how resilience can transform endurance into opportunity. I'm excited for you to hear the insights of our distinguished guest, Jon Mitchell, he has to share today with us. But before we get started with this episode of Resilient Enough to Stay, please like and subscribe to the podcast. Take it away, Ashley.
Thanks, Jon. I guess I should go ahead and do an intro for our guest. Jon Mitchell is a Lowcountry, South Carolina native, a longtime friend and college classmate, and a community leader with over 20 years' experience in business development, image consulting, civic engagement, political advisement, facilitation with equity and engagement strategy. He is serving as the senior director for the Southeast Cities Initiative at STV. And he's a deacon at the Mount Moriah Missionary Baptist Church and a board member of the Charleston Area Urban League, Charleston Moves, and the Morehouse Lowcountry Alumni Association. Jon is someone who believes in placemaking and creating safe spaces and decision making, and brings history and faith and family and a fierce curiosity of the work that keeps communities rooted and ready. He is by far one of the people that we are most excited to talk about today and just in general. We're going to be talking about history as it relates to South Carolina and really this country, equity, and the critical infrastructure that keeps the Lowcountry standing. We're going to be talking about lessons from Hurricane Hugo and the indigenous community, all the way up to local stewardship practices that apply for today. So, Jon, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Glad to be here, and so appreciative of the introduction that really kind of takes that connection that I have to my hometown and pulls it to bear with the purpose and passion that I have in the work that I get to do. So I appreciate you having me on. Glad to be here.
So, Jon, we have some traditions here, and our first question is one of them. In your own words and thoughts, of course, how do you define resilience?
So when I think of the word resilience, I think of it in the more technical sense of the phrase, but I'm also found immediately to pull myself to thinking about the way that resilience can be used to define a people and a place. Um, I think of places like Charleston that has been itself kind of established or founded from you know over centuries and honestly millennia long period of individuals who have experienced earthquakes and hurricanes and fires and daytime flooding, or sunny day flooding to be more specific. And I think of the fact that while, yes, the place itself has to be resilient enough to stand all of those factors, I also think about what it takes to be a person or a people that have a long line of generational uh, presence there. And in Charleston, we have these phrases that are birthed out of a Gullah Geechee heritage of come yes and been yes, and that idea of being somebody who has been here is really again a huge part of how I would define that word. It's somebody who can stand the muck to be within the pluff mud, if you say so, and yet still have the backbone to stand tall in the middle of it.
I love that. I love that response.
I love that, and I think, so far that's probably been one of our most people-centered definitions, um, just bringing in all of the history that goes especially in a place. Knowing and reading your bio and just what I know of you from over the years, we all share that common thread, and I know that you've worked across civic engagement and equity. How do you see those things coming together when a disaster or crisis, like the ones that you were just mentioning, when they hit?
Yeah, I believe strongly that resilience has to be embedded in capital planning, right? Like the idea that the work that is being done, when it's met well, and John, when we had our earlier conversations, you made it clear to me that emergency operational planning is just bedrock to the way that you show up in the workplace, and I think that the idea that when you have somebody who is familiar with the place in a very kind of innate or nuclear level, right? Like it creates a level of trust and understanding for how do you respect it, um, to keep its character alive and vibrant through trials and tribulations. Whether those trials and tribulations be tied to critical infrastructure damage, or even construction for that matter, right? Or for that matter, thinking of things like terrible tragedy that has come our way and the ability to say Charleston strong amidst unthinkable loss and heartbreak. I am thoughtful of many a thing when I think of that intersection between the people and the communities and the resilience that is required to still embody that Southern charm that so many people are familiar with when they think of the Lowcountry.
And let me just add, that's Southern Charm is in the ideal, not the TV show, right?
That right, absolutely. Great point.
I really
Yeah.
I realize that I wanted to kind of follow up and add that, I think those 3 concepts, right? Civic engagement, equity, and placemaking, they essentially become inseparable during a disaster, right?
Yeah.
A crisis has a way of revealing the strengths and weaknesses that already exist within a community, but it doesn't create inequities, it exposes them, in my opinion, of
Mhm.
course. And so throughout my career, in emergency management, I've learned that communities don't become resilient because they've had the best or they have the best emergency plans, that's sitting on the shelf or whatever. They become resilient because they built trust before the disaster ever occurs, right? And that trust
Exactly.
comes from engaging people where they are, listening to their concerns, of course, and understanding the unique character of the neighborhoods and ensuring every voice has a seat at the table.
Yeah, I would add if I could to that, without the infrastructure is an interconnected system, right? A vulnerability in one area cascades, right? The idea that resilience assessments identify these systemic vulnerabilities and allow us to prioritize the investment and to protect really the entire network that kind of keeps everything going. The thought of essential workers being more than fire and police and medical teams, it's the idea that when I think of times like, being in Charleston through the pandemic and knowing that one of the ways that we showed up for community was when we had an opportunity to support through a project called Black Food Fridays, an investment in the community where we had a patron. Shout out to my Morehouse brother, Bakari Sellers, who took it upon himself to work with KJ Kearney of Black Food Fridays and invest in feeding some essential workers. We not only took care of those persons that were in the fire industry and working in policing and things of that nature, but we thought about the people that were still in parking enforcement, the people that were still working in the janitorial and custodial services within the city and the government, working, of course, with those specifically those nurses, aides, and people that were working in the clinics around the region. Again, just thinking about the way that we can show up for people in ways that are maybe a little bit outside of the traditionally thought of groups and services that get a lot of love in times like that.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, that's the essence of placemaking, right? It's about creating communities where, people feel connected and invested, I
Yeah,
would say.
yeah,
Yeah, and all of those people will actually have a role to play and contribute to, in the conversations around the actual critical infrastructure assets, we always talk about the interdependencies. But when you're talking about essential staff and people, like the actual people side of the house, there's a lot of interdependencies too. And I love that you were able to think of those people and give some sort of space for them as well. Um, Also, shout out to you, shouting out Spell House. I think you're the first Morehouse person, so therefore our first Spell House episode here.
there we
Appreciate it.
go. Absolutely. You can't let me say anything about Spellhouse without mentioning my beloved, your classmate, class of 2009, Spelman grad, Dr. Jerez Renee Roberson Mitchell. That's my rock. Shout out to the homie. More degrees than the
That
thermometer, but
that's placemaking too.
that's right. That's right. That's right.
So, John, we can't talk about Charleston and resilience in the same, sentence or paragraph without mentioning Hurricane Hugo.
That's right.
Hurricane Hugo left a deep mark on the Lowcountry. I think it made landfall near Charleston as a Category 4 storm, caused roughly 6 to 7 billion in damages, left over 3,000 homes destroyed and another 18,000 with major damage, and displaced tens of thousands of people. How do you see Hugo's legacy influencing different generations in Charleston today? Whether that's economically, culturally, or emotionally.
That's so profound of a question. When I think of the legacy of Hugo, I think of being the son of a then state law enforcement officer who was activated and in the field in a part of the response immediately following, which meant that my mom and I had to hunker down at my grandma's house in North Charleston. And, thank heavens we did because a tree came through our house in Goose Creek. Um, I think about the fact that uh, through that time, there was this huge sense of um, folks from the low country don't leave when a storm comes, we stay. And there's still a strong sense of that. But personally, my grandfather, um, he himself, Deacon Leroy Gibbons said, "Look, I will never ask my family to stay in another storm if we feel like we need to get on the road." And I'm so also thoughtful of the fact that, the interstate system here now, as I'm thinking about the legacy of it, because of the fact that, decisions were made through Senator Strom Thurmond and others to make Charleston a to and not through kind of destination, right? Like the fact that 95 does not come through Charleston, it goes a little further north of here, means that the branch of the Interstate 26 that reaches out to Charleston beyond I-95 in times of emergency has the ability to turn all lanes west. And so whenever there's a major storm that comes nowadays, that gets activated at a certain point, and it allows for traffic to be traveling out of both the east and westbound lanes all west, pushing up to 95, at which point it then, has to retain a certain level of kind of bidirectional travel. But there is that ability from a state, emergency management perspective to kind of allow for better flow, because I can think of times beyond Hugo where hurricanes would come and it would just be such a snarl. I remember sitting in more than 3 hours worth of traffic to travel less than 20 miles, because there were so many people trying to leave before they made this change. I think of the fact that I have cousins and family members that have a certain expectation of what to do in a storm because of the readiness that we had and the preparedness that was felt and kind of thought of from the time that Hugo came. And though they weren't born here or born during that time, they have a critical understanding of just the impact that was there from that storytelling tradition and the ability to receive that stern awareness of just how dangerous these kind of systems can be, without having to have that firsthand touch to it. And I think of those as some of those kind of both generational, infrastructural, as well as just personal legacies of Hugo. And it's kind of I guess well-healed scars, more tough, or should I say resilient, bodies that were built out of the pain and war-torn kind of feel that came out of such a disaster.
John, I think what you're talking about is like the trauma and like collective memory of a
Yeah.
community that I think is really powerful. And thank you for sharing such a personal story of that and surviving a disaster. When we were first talking about Hurricane Hugo, because it happened when we were noticeably younger, it's one of the ones that I don't always think about when we are talking about billion-dollar disasters, and yet we know from the conversations that we have and what we've seen that when you have a billion-dollar disaster, it takes years, sometimes decades, for a community to recover, and we're almost at the tail end of that within Charleston. But how many of those billion-dollar disasters have we seen in recent memory and what that's going to take? There's a lot of things that you just shared, whether it be the infrastructure or the community lessons that we are going to see playing out in other communities now. And in that way, Charleston is a blueprint in how you actually stay.
No, yeah, I think that's a brilliant point to be made. And the idea of Charleston being a blueprint in those ways is one that we carry with pride. And I think it's a pride that's felt kind of across the entire depth of existence here. It's not one that is whole or held exclusively in the hands or powers of those that are in power. And it's a responsibility of kind of I guess sharing that common experience with so many people, because there's such a huge influx of folks that are not literally from here. Those communes, as I kind of mentioned, alluded to a little earlier, the idea that there are people that are transplanted here that don't have that history, that don't come from places where that natural disaster occurrence or risk is as prevalent, and so they don't necessarily know what to kind of see or expect whenever those kind of storms can arise. And I think it can kind of cause for a certain lax response if you're not careful, because there have been times where storms have been coming this way and we create this huge mounting of preparedness to evacuate, and then after the storm passes, there's nothing actually hit Charleston, and then you kinda have this false sense of, "Oh, that's all this is? Man, hurricane season is vacation season." And it's like,
The lull, the complacency.
yeah, but it's like when you've been here and you've seen it hit and or you've seen it hit somewhere else, you kinda have a different level of I guess, reckoning or, rememory to
Yeah,
borrow from a term, yeah.
in that way, it reminds me a lot of, New Orleans and Katrina, and I think
Absolutely.
John, I think that was our freshman year
Yeah.
of
Yeah.
college, right?
Yeah.
And seeing that where you also have all of the same things at play, including people moving to the city now who did not experience that, but the community, the collective also does have that deep memory, and that's another billion-dollar disaster or over $1 billion that I think is starting to drop out from the collective memory, but definitely has a lot of lessons there.
No, and I
Yeah.
think about the resilience of people, John, I promise.
Yeah. No, no, no. Go ahead.
I think about the when I think of that Katrina example, actually, I'm really drawn to the ways that I have to kinda shout out in Atlanta as being a refuge to the entirety of the Southeast in many ways that kind of deal
Absolutely.
with, those kind of responses, because whenever there was an emergent issue in Charleston or in New Orleans, guess where people flocked to?
Yes. Yes.
We all had an uncle or a
Mhm.
cousin or a family member, friend that lived in Atlanta with a house
A
big enough
college
to be like.
campus.
Yeah, exactly. Right, because there's so many friends that graduated with us that kind of got an opportunity to still have a full HBCU experience
Yeah.
because of the time that they came and arrived in the arms that were so open from us, whether it be from those students that were similarly from New Orleans, or those students that just kind of understood what it meant to kind of have to be, um, refuged, in such a way. So I'm super grateful that we had that experience to be able to draw from.
Yeah, that's a great point too. I was gonna make the point myself about, disasters like Hurricane Hugo and Hurricane Katrina, they become part of that community's identity. But really also the safe haven for those folks, like you just mentioned, also, it creates an identity for them as well. I mean, since Hurricane Katrina, as Houston changed and all those neighboring cities where they had a huge influx of folks. And getting back to Hurricane Hugo and Charleston,
Mhm.
economically, storms like that, they permanently reshape, the people there, how the communities developed and the investments that are made in the infrastructure and resilience in the future. That's culturally, emotionally, all those different things. And one of the things that personal story I have is,
Mhm.
my wife, it's not from Charleston, but she's originally from Mobile, Alabama, her and her family, but they were kind of uprooted because her father was a carpenter and built houses, and so they moved the whole family to Charleston to help rebuild Charleston. So she wasn't there for the actual storm, but she was there after the storm, and she just, I just hear her recount the stories of how it felt like, kind of going into like a war torn area, and it just was, and just desolate, and just, kind of didn't want to be there, but. But to that point, though, now those folks have deep roots. I know her family has deep roots there. There's tons of family that still live there, but it's also a representation of the people who chose to go there and help rebuild too, right? So
Absolutely.
now they're an important part of that community and its history. So I think
Yeah.
those are things to think about.
And I think it's important to note, right, as much as we like to tease here locally around the concept of caminhas and beignets, there's such a love fest around it. We joke and jeer about that, but it's all meant to represent the fact that, in truth, in many ways, other than those First Nations folks that are here that kind of help to guide the location of the original Charlestown landing, because they said you might not want to choose this point, but if you go down to Oyster Point a little further north in Albemarle, you'll find a more suitable and hospitable land that you can likely take home base in. And so, outside of those individuals that kind of led that original kind of guidance on its location, that kind of led to the settlements of Carolina colonies as well as the Georgia colony. Um, you got a number of people that, as many generations back as they wanna go, they're still gonna trace their roots back to a vessel that crossed a body of water. Um,
Absolutely.
and those
Creative way of
vessels
putting
can
that.
be, of many different shapes and sizes, but, those, that really kind of leads itself to, that sense of community and that character that's here that is built through a number of different traditions and experiences. And it's that tapestry that creates the quilt that is so Southern and so um, local to that fabric of Charleston.
So I actually want to expand on that a little bit, because it leads into one of our next questions. Charleston is this really dynamic southern city, and it's built from all of these different cultures. Like you said, the First Nations, the enslaved peoples, immigrants, and generations just overall now that have mixed and have all of this different heritage that have all left names on the lands in some
Mhm.
cases.
That's right.
And it to your point, maybe pointed people out of a floodplain
Mhm,
before they
mhm.
knew. And you're part of that legacy, and I'm just curious how those histories have shaped how the Low Country approaches land and water and just overall the stewardship that we're talking about.
Oh, for sure. I think, when you have such an interconnected group of people, it creates a need to um, have a shared respect for each other that is many times difficult to elaborate upon if you're not from here or have some level of kind of connected fiber to it. Um, it is impossible for me to distinguish um, in many ways, the bits or pieces that make up John. From, my heritage as a Gullah Geechee, born and raised, I consider myself a Geechee griot, right? Like the fact that I have to know, you know, what it means to travel up and past the Ashapoo rivers and then to, these areas in Green Pond and Hickory Hill where my maternal side of the family is, or the Sea Islands and the places like James Island where my dad's family can trace back more than 7 generations right here in greater Charleston County. I find a lot of just uh, homing that kind of reminds me of the truth I like to share with people that, if you consider a place like Africa, the root of those of us that are descendant of the enslavement system, right? Those American descendants of enslaved humans and persons. Um, I think that if Africa is the root, then Charleston must be the trunk of the tree, and it branches out from there, right? And so, kind of being from a place that is so deeply placed within that greater storytelling, um, it comes with a great sense of pride, but also a great sense of weight and responsibility to retain and maintain a level of resilience to continue to have a place to call home for those that kind of come back and visit.
I love that idea, and I love the idea of never losing that connection.
Mhm.
And that's essentially what roots are, is being able to stay connected to something that feels real and permanent and solid.
Yeah, I think that's a great story. I mean, the Low Country, has a remarkable story, and I think its region has been shaped by the indigenous peoples, who understood, kind of the rhythms of the land and the
Yeah.
water, and through those enduring contributions, I feel like that there has been a community, an economy, and a culture, that's been built by generations of those families who've adapted to living in such a dynamic environment. I did want to say though, as emergency managers, which is my background, we often focus on infrastructure, evacuation routes, and response plans and all those kind of things. But the long term resilience also depends on understanding the cultural landscape. Uh,
Mhm.
I think, in my opinion, I think how people connect to their neighborhoods, why certain places may hold deep meaning, and how that you know how that we shape decisions about recovery and rebuilding too, right?
No, I think that that's a great point, and when I'm thoughtful of that, I immediately am drawn to the fact that a lot of the reason why some of those cultures exist, if I could take a moment to wax poetic about the historic kind of nuance there, is the fact that there was such an isolation occurred because of the sea island nature of the geography here in the Lowcountry, right? When I think of my mother's side of the family that is based in more of that kind of uh, Colleton County, Beaufort side of Charleston or of the South Carolina makeup or the Lowcountry, I'm thoughtful of the fact that that is a deep connection to those we talk about a lot about the marooned kind of Roanoke society that got lost, but there was also a Spanish encampment that tried to set place in St. Helena, South Carolina, back in the 1500s, ahead of 1670s England, arrival here in Carolina, and the folks that were there included enslaved Africans that were there with them, and the captain left and those people stayed, and they were absorbed into the First Nations tribes that were there in that part of the world, and they never left. And so when 150 some odd years later, people from the Barbados colony, those 8 lords proprietor, right, that came from Barbados to start Charleston, and then the same Ashley and Cooper that name our rivers that kind of follow on either side of the harbor, the Berkeleys that kind of name my home county, Dorchester that names my current home county. All of those people that then left Charleston and went on to found the Bahamas. Um, there's a reason why when you hear people from Charleston talk and you hear people from the Bahamas talk, there's that twang that is very distinct, that shared language of kind of phraseology and slang that is kind of built in that isolation, but that same isolation causes a challenge when you're talking about how do you move from a place to place, or how do you create a level of safety for people that are so differently set aside from the mainland. Um, and so that culture comes at a cost. And if you're not thoughtful about the investment that it requires, that for that fiscal responsibility to maintain its place, then you're going to lack a certain level of that beauty from its ability to connect to the greater world.
Great points, John. So, John, just to kind of move into our next topic, we want to stay on track here. I know we have a number of important questions that we wanted to ask you, and kind of some talking points we wanted you to expound upon.
Yeah.
Uh, so, you carry a legacy of community leadership. Um, can you share a personal story where you balanced community needs, political realities, and equity during a crisis?
Oh God, yes. Let me think about that a little bit so I can kind of come to one that feels right size for the moment of time, right? When I think of um, the work that I am privileged to do here in my own backyard, I think about the fact that it is so tied to the work I get to do in other places as well. I think about the kinship that gets formed between groups of people that are similar but um, different. And I think about the fact that, here in my own backyard, I have a deep and thorough relationship with so many communities that were um, directly or indirectly um, displaced from that critical infrastructure. I talked and bragged so much about how Interstate 26 is a fundamental part of how we get around. I can't think of anybody, in this area that doesn't rely on that interstate system multiple times a day to get to and from, to grocery stores and visiting families and everything else. Except for maybe my mother-in-law, who will do everything she can to avoid having to travel on an interstate if she could. That same system in its building, however, caused quite the divide of a lot of communities. And there are projects that are being placed into the reality to really kind of solve for some of the pressure that is on that system to move this influx of people to and through Charleston. And it's so funny that that system is now kind of creating a reknitting of sorts of those communities. As I ride through those communities that are along the would-be corridor for the Lowcountry Rapid Transit System, one of the state's first mass transit system, I am thoughtful of the fact that, um, you know, I step into neighborhoods where I am met with old family friends that all live together in a housing complex that is no longer in existence, but yet we drive over its site every day. And I am thoughtful of the fact that there's that desire to want to make better for many of the people that live in a number of these communities that are reliant on transit, despite it not being a maybe number one or two choice for ridership and many people that kind of get to and fro. Um, it doesn't change the fact that there are a great deal of people that do rely on transit and are needing better systems in place to help serve them in reliable and meaningful ways. So grateful to kind of see that system kind of pulling a thread through um, communities and reknitting them in a way that is kind of tying back to that fabric of that quilt that we mentioned a little earlier, that tapestry of mixed cultures and beliefs that kind of make up the greater Charleston identity.
Yeah, it sounds like you're an integral part of that as well. And one of the I transitioned my consulting firm to really focus on crisis leadership, and because of that very reason, right? The realities of leadership during a crisis is, the decisions are not always perfect, but it's folks like you who are there, doing the work behind the scenes who, really allow decisions to be made with the information that you have, of course, but also to make sure that the environment is creates an opportunity, for that resilience, right? In those moments, as someone who's I spent, a lot of my time in emergency management, as I mentioned before, but I've seen firsthand, how the best leaders are able to navigate those competing pressures, and where you don't lose sight of the people that you're serving, and you understand that that it's not easy, and often requires difficult engagements and conversations, and a level of transparency and willingness that not everyone's willing to make and have. But I think that you've done a great job there in Charleston, and kind of weaving the fabric that's needed there to hold that community together. So really
Yeah,
commend you.
I think many it gets back to that idea of public trust and how it's itself is a
Yeah.
currency, right? It's a currency that is so difficultly earned, yet so easily lost. And I am thoughtful of the fact that in some of the comings and goings that I've had to deal with elected officials that kind of came up to me and said, "Hey, look, man, um, so you're the guy that they're sending in here to talk about this project because you look like us." And I kind of, received that and said, "You know what? I'm not even gonna fight you on that because I hear where that's coming from. I know exactly those kind of people. I've been a part of organizational charts where, you know, uh, people have kind of looked at it and said, 'Oh, this is a person that kinda represents the reality of that particular demographic,' right? Uh, However, I kind of rebutted the comment by saying, um, but do you know that, I get to serve on a national kind of leadership of this kind of practice, and, um, because of that and my rootedness here, you're now getting access to somebody who has experiences across this country and is seen as a leader in this space, serving his own backyard." A lot of people get to do good for places that they had to grow to love. Imagine what I'm gonna do for a place I was born to love. You know,
Yeah.
there's a weight there in that trust that has to be earned, and I can have those conversations that others can't. Nobody else can really step into a neighborhood and get that same homegrown reception. But it also, like I said, talking about those weights, right? That's a burden to be put on shoulders to carry that. I don't carry lightly either, right? Luckily, God granted me broad shoulders. So I told him a lot of that, and with a backstead tall. But the ability to kinda answer those questions and not back down or cower or feel challenged in in any kind of way insignificant, but be able to give a thorough response around, "No, I'm the right person for this because this is legacy for me. This is the place where my son is gonna grow up and be able to say, 'Oh, my dad helped to create the
Right.
community feedback loop that allowed for the people of this area to know about this project through and through and to have their thumbprint on it in many meaningful and indirect ways. Again, super, super proud of the work that I've been able to do in the low country and super, super proud of the ability to still be here,
Mhm.
uh, you know, even in the middle of such amazing opportunities for career and professional growth to still be based here in the low country and stand up with so many people that I've got to see grow into the local leaders that they are today.
Yeah, yeah, that and you create a whole 'nother perspective for me as well, when we talk about, diversity and what that looks like. It doesn't always look the same, and diversity can mean a lot of different things, but, you bring a diverse background to that community, and whether, you're from the community or you look like the community, diversity is means a lot of different things, and I think that's a wonderful perspective too.
Yeah, if I could take a moment on diversity, I love to talk about the fact that, Ashley and I kind of noted about our Spell House experiences. And I think about the fact that even when I define myself as, Black and African American, it's really colored and nuanced, mostly because of the fact that I went to a school where designating myself as the black guy in the classroom wasn't enough. You know? Going to Morehouse was the first time that I ever had to fight for competitive thought, in a room full of other black men taught
Mm.
and led by a black man. So that's, and then again, speaking more specifically back to the Low Country, my freshman year, my roommate was a man named Hassan Canoe, who was from, Silver Spring, Maryland, but, born and raised Sierra Leone. And so when he talks about being an African American, he's coming from a different place than I do when I say it. And yet still, there is a very deep bond that exists between a place like Freetown, Sierra Leone, and Charleston, South Carolina, where Mayor Aki Sawyer of Freetown has come to Charleston, which is a sister city of theirs, and seen the sweetgrass baskets that are weaved today on places like Market Street in Charleston that have this kind of rice fanning tradition from the west coast of Africa. And again, I think a lot about the fact that those shared cultures and bonds are kind of you know inextricable from what makes me who I am today.
Man, John, I gotta say, and you just mentioned Maryland, so you're talking about my community. I love my community. You love your community. And I just pray that everyone sort of have the same pride in their community, as you do, and, we all do, and I think that that really would move action. It would make such a huge difference in the country and, globally if everyone sort of took pride in their community and their history and their, like, sense of place and belonging in that. It's really not hard to see why you have the trust of a community, that you're serving because you're just so proud of it. Um, and, it sort of leads into the next topic, but just what you just said a few minutes ago about being trusted, and taking that responsibility, very seriously. You have the trust of a community, and because of that, you also have to have the trust of what's behind you and what's,
Mhm.
supporting you to that end. In this case, I'm alluding to and leading into the critical infrastructure of it all. Being able to trust in the people that are propping you up, but you also have to have something that you are believing in and promoting. And I know that I spend a lot of my days at work and, in the professional side of my life
Yeah,
focused on critical infrastructure and the like staggering costs of projects, whether it is a recovery or the prevention, especially when it comes to the aging infrastructure in this country. Um, you know, Knowing that there are leaders who are trusting you to make the good decisions, I'm kind of curious, if you had $10 million or if you were king for the day to lead some of those decisions to look at critical infrastructure, whether it's the roads, the stormwater systems, or even just the coastal protection. We know
yeah,
that water will always find its way back home.
that's right.
Um, which systems do you think are most vulnerable and should be prioritized for some of those investments within the community?
So, man, I'm tired. There's so much that you've said just now, Ashley, and your points were so well received. One, I gotta say that I'm grateful to work in a place that truly believes in investing in resilience and sees it as a part of its fiscal responsibility, right? Every dollar is a strategic safeguard against lost revenue, emergency repairs, and community disruption, right? But I'm also thoughtful about that trust that we mentioned earlier, right? Because uh, along with that trust comes a duty to protect. Um, and so I'm also grateful that I get to stand with a group of practitioners that truly believe in the protection of public and private investments, and by making infrastructure more durable and adaptive in many ways, that kind of gets to we talked a moment ago yesterday around the idea of what it means to be um, cohesive and comprehensive in our approaches to solutions. And that means bringing a blend of natural solutions to bear with those folks that have, the desire to want to see a vista out of their front porch into the harbor, and kind of helping them understand that you can do both.
That's
Understanding
the
that
Southern charm.
Hey, listen, and again, like was mentioned, Southern Charm, definitely predates the early, 2010s, so, I feel like even just that notion, right, of Southern Charm has its own level of weight, because there's, some people that will take that thought and, see a history and tradition of subservience, where in actuality, it's really birthed in my background from a place of pride. And I think that, confusing the two is a reasonable jump, but a maybe not safe one to make.
We don't wanna weaponize Southern charm.
That's right. That's right.
So, John, before we jump into our final question of the day, I did want to say, for me, you're the what I would call the poster child for pride and ownership, right? Every organization I've been part of, every community I've been a part of, I've always wanted to have folks surrounded, be surrounded by folks rather, who have pride and ownership, and I think that's something that kind of you exude, when you talk about your experiences in Charleston, your roles and responsibilities there, the things that you've done to help that community thrive. So I just wanted to say that I think pride and ownership is such an important piece of resilience overall as well, whether that's at a community level, organizational level. So did want to say that. So appreciate you for that. But looking ahead 10 years,
Mhm.
what policy change or community action would you prioritize to make Charleston and similar coastal communities more resilient if there are others that are tuning in today?
Man, the idea of embedding a resilience into the standards of capital planning, design criteria, and maintenance routines. The idea of not only taking it from that kind of very direct and specific, you know, step process, but the idea of not always, though it sounds good, building for people, but building with them. I think there's a huge distinction there, and that idea of truly, um, restoring dignity to the people that find themselves here regardless of their tenure. The idea to stay here or be here, or plan for here in a way that sees you creating the next evolution of what it means to stay, play, pray, study, live in Charleston, and that quality of life that is so routinely sought after, um, is what I imagine will be a critical need for those that are in leadership, to keep at front of mind as we continue to develop a, um, more perfect union.
I think that's a beautiful way to end. Building with people gives people so much more of an ownership, an incentive, and it just goes back to the trust of the community, um, and why people want to stay. When you have, we as a society and culture, we have the ability to move and be more transient than ever. The idea of a reason why you want to stay, whether it's after a disaster or a crisis, or just having that connection. All of those roots really, really matter. And I appreciate the conversation. And I'm so excited to get out into my community
Yeah.
today, where after a recording, it's such a uplifting conversation.
It is, and I really like how he's really hammered the point home about public trust, right? Again, in my field where public trust is everything and crisis leadership, has a huge responsibility in managing that for communities and organizations. And I think John has just done a fantastic job of helping build that in his own community. And it's not just one person. It's not just the leader at the top, in the organization. It takes a village. And so he's doing his part. So it was great to have you on today, John. It was an awesome conversation.
Yeah, I greatly appreciate you guys thinking of me. I want to take a moment to acknowledge that village component. When you see the kind of duty bound version of me in front of you today, know that that person was handcrafted and meticulously built over the last nearly 40 years from a giant in this community herself who saw it fit to placed me in a place where I had grandmothers, aunts, uncles, cousins, where I couldn't step foot left, right, or sideways without running into somebody that says, "Hey, aren't you Rosetta's son? Aren't you Big Mitch's son? Aren't you Grandma? Aren't you B's Annie B's grand?" And those things kind of again were thoughtfully done by my mom, Rosetta Mitchell, and her ability to kind of be a tent pole within this community in very subtle ways, standing as a leader across a number of organizations, and vocations, and really still placing within me a sense of civic duty that extends beyond anything that somebody can do on a random Tuesday in November, and truly sees it as a part of the responsibility to a place and people. I cannot stand in this space and receive these compliments without offering up a moment of gratitude to the progenitor of that person that you see. That is my mom. So thank you for the time, and thank you for the opportunity to share a little bit about my background.
Awesome. Love it. Love it.
Well said. Great episode. Thanks, everyone. That really was a great episode. I am so thankful for the guests that we have. John was really powerful in sharing how his community ownership and awareness of his history in his community can really serve in the resilience space.
Yeah, Ashley, as someone who's worked in emergency management for a really long time, I've learned that, the strongest communities aren't necessarily the ones with the most resources, but the ones that have the most advocates and the ones that have not just advocates, but champions for their communities. And, John embodies that.
Yeah, I think living in an area where you create resilience is always going to be powerful. And just the idea of staying after a disaster, like he shared with Hugo, always an amazing testimony. Even the idea of transportation infrastructure, which is an area people might not be thinking about, but he provided a real case of why you should make that a consideration in your community. All of it just leads into the idea of being on the road to resilience, really, and thinking about these things from all of the different elements that you need and all of the people that you need in the car. I don't want to go too resilience, road to resilience heavy, but you need a lot of people thinking about these things.
Well, for me personally, I would like John at the wheel, right? I mean, he's the man that I want driving because he is a man of deep knowledge, but in particular, you don't often meet someone in this space who, they're a lifelong resident of where they work and where they make their impact. And most people leave their home, to go make an impact somewhere else. And he has grown up in that community. He has deep knowledge of not just the community, but the culture there, and he's able to weave that into his work and the leadership that he exhibits on behalf of that community. So, kudos to him.
Yeah, he's truly resilient enough to stay. So do just want to remind everyone, thank you for listening today and getting some of the insights, sharing and hearing the stories that John shared. For more episodes and more content, always remember to like and subscribe. Leave us a comment and also engage with us. We're always interested in hearing your feedback. So until the next time.